Okay, good afternoon, and thanks for coming to my DMA lecture recital titled How to Write for the Guitar Instead of Just Playing What You Know, Arranging Topics for Solo Jazz Guitar. The recital will be divided into three sections. First, some brief background information, followed by introductory comments about the 5 general tips on page 2 of your handout. Then the main discussion of 4 specific arranging features with some audio examples. And then last, I'm going to play 2 selections for you and describe, give an overview of where these specific features occur in the arrangements I'm going to play. All of the examples, audio examples, and my performance were chosen to try to illustrate one or more of the key points that I'm going to talk about today. And my attempt to try to provide an analytical overview of my intuitive approach to arranging for the solo guitar. I was introduced to jazz guitar in the early 1970s in Cincinnati, Ohio, my hometown, by Herb Rogers, who taught me the basics of a chord melody solo, which is essentially playing the melody on top, supported by intermittently played bass notes and chords on the bottom. I'm going to demonstrate what I'm talking about now, because I'll refer back to this basic style as the presentation progresses. This is a polka dots and moonbeams. Etc. I feel that all serious jazz guitarists need to be able to play this fundamental style on any standard tune in any key by sight. And I spent a greater part of my life trying to perfect this style, working on comping skills and improvisatory skills, but without really getting too deeply into arranging for the solo guitar. And today I'd like to talk about some of the tools that I've come across to help develop a more advanced, highly personalized style for arranging for solo jazz guitar. And though the focus is on the guitar, I'm hoping that the techniques I'll be discussing will be useful to you regardless of what your musical activities are. As I was practicing these basic chord melody solos, I also took classical guitar lessons with Ed Gardena in New York. And then later in New York, Patrick O'Brien, another classical guitarist and lutenist, inspired me to delve more deeply into traditional classical guitar repertoire, especially the work of Francisco Tárrega and Miguel Lobet. I was particularly struck by the rich harmonies that I heard in the music I encountered. And mostly I admired the seamless way melody and harmony merged in those compositions. And I think it was that quality that planted the seeds for me to attempt some sort of fusion of composition and improvisation. This early training in both classical and jazz guitar provided a good foundation for me when I turned professional. And in the mid-1990s, I worked steadily in both genres and becoming somewhat prolific, writing and arranging for my own ensembles, small ensembles. But I never wrote anything for solo guitar. The work that I was doing on classical guitar was simply playing pieces that I'd memorized, note for note, more or less. All that changed 3 years ago when I came back to school as an adult. I attended a master's program, Master's in Music at William Patterson University. And I was in the hallway one day, and one of the teachers there, internationally renowned guitarist Gene Bertoncini, said, "Greg, come here for a second, I want you to hear something." And he offered to play an arrangement for me, and he played Body and Soul, a standard song. And it really kind of blew me away. I heard so many colorful harmonies, and what he was playing is not something I would ever play spontaneously. And I knew that he'd worked it out in advance, prearranged. And that's what I think inspired me to start practicing the guitar again and to see what I could come up with on my own that might be similar to that. I'd like to just play a little bit of that arrangement of Gene's, just to give you a frame of reference to start off with. This is Gene's Bertoncini's Body and Soul. Pretty colorful stuff. So I wrote a solo guitar arrangement to a standard Darn That Dream, and then to another one, There'll Never Be Another You. And I showed that one to my arranging teacher at the time, Jim McNeely, who said if I were ever to publish a book of solo guitar arrangements like that, he'd be among the first to buy it. But this surprised me, especially coming from him. But it made me think and consider that perhaps arrangements like these might be useful to edify not only guitar players, but other instrumentalists and arrangers as well. So then a year later, I met Professor Harold Danko here at Eastman and was introduced to his concept of the improvising composer. And 2 semesters of independent study with him encouraged me to build on those first 2 arrangements I'd done, and actually led me to the point where I am today, talking to you. I completed 6 more solo guitar arrangements in my time under Harold, and the writing was a lot of fun, and I came into the lessons and played what I had done that week for him. It was highly intuitive, but one thing led to another. First of all, as I was going along, I really felt compelled to document the work that I was doing. And so I did by releasing this CD called My World on 6 Strings, which I'm giving to everyone who doesn't already have one today. That recording was a lot of work. I wasn't getting any credit for that, but it evolved into this DMA lecture recital because through the lessons and through thinking about what I was doing, I was able to identify some features in these arrangements through analyzing them that I thought I could put together in some form of pedagogy. It was therefore not only a natural outgrowth of my lessons with Professor Dankel, but also, I hoped, the genesis of a longer-term goal to perhaps do a series of workshops or method books to expand on this talk in the future so that it can be shared and utilized to help other people as an educational tool. I thought also perhaps I might be able to get something published in the future if I keep working, like this book by Gene Bertoncini's arrangements. This is where the Body and Soul version that you just heard came from. Hal Leonard published this, and it's really marvelous, and there's a CD in there. So that's the long-term goal, but ultimately I'm hoping to blur the lines that separate a pre-composed classical style and an improvised jazz style. So of the 8 songs that are recorded on the CD, 6 of them contain improvisation, and of those 6 that contain improvisation, at least 50% of those arrangements are improvised and the rest are pre-arranged. And it's the pre-arranged parts that I'm going to be talking about mostly today. And 4 specific features that I've organized into 4 categories using the open strings of the guitar, voice leading, chromatic motion, and constant structures. After endorsing this project, Gene told me that most guitarists just play everything they know. Very few actually write for the guitar. And those words really summed up well what I was trying to do, or at least where I'm heading. So I'll talk now about the 5 general tips on page 2 of your handout, starting with learning the lyrics of the song that you're arranging. Of course, I dug in initially just so full of myself about the arrangement that I admit I neglected the lyrics, but it helps to know sometimes what the song's about, and also to listen to penultimate vocal versions of the song so that you can find out how the best singers are phrasing the melody. Of course, sometimes the chords that you're playing, one of them is going to be a little bit more important than another one depending on what the lyrics are in any given moment. And fortunately, I had the benefit of getting some tips from Harold, because he performed one of the tunes that I recorded, Someone to Watch Over Me, with in a duet setting, rubato with Liza Minnelli. So he shared his experience of that with me, and I also ran what I'd written past a good singer friend of mine over the phone, who also gave me some her opinion. And so my point is just to, as an instrumentalist, it pays to investigate some of these things. And if you can start thinking in a singer's terms, it might make your instrumental performance more impactful. Number 2 is the concept of setting the melody in different ways. Composers like Bach, Schubert, Wagner, and others are all experts, and we can learn from their good example regardless of what idiom or style of music that we're working with. In my solo guitar arrangements, I try to always alter the various sections slightly. If the melody repeats, most of these songs are AA, BA form, so the melody is going to repeat at least 3 times. I try to make slight harmonic variations each time the melody repeats. Number 3 is the use of modulation, not just for the sake of it, but when your intuition leads you there. All but 2 of my arrangements modulate at least once, if not 2 or 3 times. Darn That Dream, the first one that I wrote, starts in the key of G, modulates to the key of E natural for the second A section. The bridge is in E flat, as you would normally expect if you're starting in G. The last A section is in G, but the ending chord is an E chord. I'd like to play that for you now from my recording, Darn That Dream, just to specifically illustrate the modulation I just spoke about, but also as an example of the next bullet point, I'm going to talk about intros and endings. The score for what you're about to hear is on page 3 of your handout, and as you're listening, you may have questions or you may notice other things in the music, and I hope that I'm going to cover those as the presentation continues, and if I miss anything, you can ask me at the end. This is the introduction from page 3 of your handout to Darn That Dream. I slightly altered the melody here to facilitate the modulation to E, but I'm using material that I draw from the original song. So writing your own intros and endings is important. I wrote a brief introduction and or ending for all but one of the 8 songs that I arranged for the CD. The introduction you heard just now on Darn That Dream was my own creation, just a way that I felt prepared the melody, got us ready for the melody. I didn't take it from a verse that was already existing. I used the same material as an ending as well, only I added a 3-bar tag of material from measures 33 and 34, which you can see on page 4 of your handout. I'll just play the last section of the arranged melody and then the coda that I wrote to end the song. Exactly the same as the beginning. So moving to the last bullet point on page 2 of your handout, all of the songs that I improvised on with these arrangements, I did so in the middle of the song. In other words, I played a pre-arranged, a written out part, and then I improvised and then played another arranged part, usually involving a modulation. But I varied that pattern somewhat in order to get a change of texture and hopefully surprise listeners' expectations. And I think that it worked very well on the song There'll Never Be Another You to vary the flow on the CD. And I'd like to play that for you now, first of all, because it's the only audio example you'll hear with improvisation. It's a little bit long. It's the longest thing you'll hear today also, 3 minutes and 48 seconds. But I think it's important to play now because you get a chance to hear how I've tried to merge improvisation with composition. And also it serves well to orally introduce the key arranging features that I'm going to talk about right after we're through listening to this. So the first two choruses you're going to hear are improvised with a single line solo, and I've provided chord changes if you for anyone who cares to follow along, so you know what I'm playing over. And then the third chorus is the prearranged melody, starting at A on page 5 of your handout. And then I did something else different with the fourth chorus, and actually the fifth chorus, although we won't hear the fifth chorus. But I tried to write out an improvisation. In other words, I tried to imagine, well, what would I improvise? And then I wrote it out. So it's not actually improvised, but I'm hoping it sounds like it's improvised, like it's impromptu. And that's written out on page 6. I may talk over this, given the length. So this is the another in E flat. The end of the first chorus and beginning of the second chorus. The only chord you'll hear until the prearranged part starts. We're approaching what I have written out with the melody on page 5. Last 3 bars is a little like a tag that I wrote, which I use as connective tissue for each chorus. It's the beginning of page 6. like to talk about these specific arranging features, beginning on page 7 of your handout. First, when I refer to an open string guitar voicing, I'm talking about one or more of the guitar strings being open at any given time and the notes not being fingered. A unique aspect of the guitar when compared to piano is that we have the opportunity to play notes without actually fingering them. And the open strings on the guitar, by the way, are E, the lowest, 6th string, A, the 5th string, D, the 4th string, G, the 3rd string, B, the 2nd string, and then E again, 2 octaves above the former. So all of these notes can be used in open string voicings, but I'm using the top 2 and lower 2 the most because they provide the potential for bass and soprano pedal tones. So these open strings also have a slightly different timbre than fingered notes. For example, this is a G major 13 chord where I'm fingering every note. This is the exact same chord where I've got 2 open strings. This is an A minor 9 with every note fingered, except for the root, by the way. And then, I don't know if you can notice, but I have to kind of stretch my fingers a bit to get the minor 2nd of the 9 and the flatted 3rd. So it's not so easy. And if I just change up a little bit, I can utilize open strings, get a colorful timbre, and also it's easier on my fingers. Therefore, I try to transpose into the major or minor keys of a D, A, and E in order to make ample use of open string pedals. The only song that doesn't actually have an entire A section in one of those keys on the CD is Polka Dots and Moonbeams, but then again the bridge of that tune happens to be in A major. So I'm really using this quite a lot. Now I've grown accustomed to or face standard song in E flat, but when I started the arrangement for the CD, I used an open A string as a dominant pedal, transposing the song to D. I modulate to E flat for an improvisation, and then finished with a third yet different melody in E major. So I'm using the pedal point also as a organizational aspect of the song because it connects the 2 modulations, and it's also an aural highlight. So take a look at example 1 on page 7. Play that for you now. This is the very beginning of the arrangement where I first set up the dominant pedal. In example 2, at the bottom of page 7 and continuing on page 8, from the middle section of the tune, you can see how the A pedal is used to facilitate the modulation from D to E flat and then to E major. I'll play that now. Here I am in D major. Here's my A pedal. Now I'm in E flat, and I'm going to improvise. You're not going to hear the whole improvisation, but I'll play just the beginning of it so you get the idea, and the very end of the improvisation. At the end of the improvisation, I'm going to sit on fermata, on a B flat 13 flat 9 chord. You'll hear the B flat. Here's the end of the improvisation. And B flat. Here's my A pedal again. Same material, only now instead of a dominant pedal, it's a plagal pedal. subtle difference is great to take advantage of. And the next example, number 3 on page 8, from later in the same arrangement, you can hear simultaneously sounding open string bass and soprano pedals as middle strings. As these open strings sound, I finger notes on the middle strings like this, creating some colorful intervals against the static pedals, such as minor seconds that are otherwise impossible to play any other way. Example 3. And in the next example, the same thing happens, only this time the finger notes rise above the high open E string so that major and minor second intervals sound first beneath the pedal and then above it. Since the melody at this point is actually the E open string, this is, and I have fingered major triads moving in oblique motion against the melody. This is an example of linear voice leading, not unlike invertible counterpoint, which is going to lead us to the next major feature. Let's have a listen to example 4. So, talking about linear voice leading, most guitarists, including me, actually, use the basic chord melody technique as a starting off point for improvisations. Interspersing chords and melodies, hopefully tastefully. And there's nothing wrong with that. And with lots of experience, you can really take that style to a high level. I mean, I think of someone like Joe Pass. He's pretty much mastered this style of play in his solo guitar improvisations. But that's not exactly the same as what we heard from Gene Bertoncini a couple of minutes ago, nor is it really the focus of this lecture recital. But I mention it only to try to make a distinction, or at least a distinction that I make, between writing for the guitar and practicing improvisation based on what you already know. And I think that this second arranging feature point that I'm talking about, linear voice leading, is what I consider to be the chief difference between these two styles, and perhaps what tends to bridge the gap between classical composition and jazz improvisation. Now, I'm not quite there yet, but I take a 590 level class with Darius, and we've been looking at romantic pieces, and most recently a mazurka by Chopin. And if you think about the way that he's voice leading, this is, I'm taking baby steps in that direction, and I'm trying to avoid the kind of vertical playing that guitarists can tend to get stuck in. So voice leading and counterpoint really maximize the guitar's potential. I try to use independent voice leading as opposed to block chords. Now, by block chords, I don't mean the 4-part horn, 4-way closed horn arrangements popularized by Count Basie's arrangers, even though that's most likely the origin of what I'm talking about, or of the locked hands piano stylings of George Shearing. But I'm talking more about the Wes Montgomery chord style, which involves playing 4 adjacent strings to harmonize a top string melody, something like this. And the point is to think of harmony in a linear instead of only a vertical fashion, and of individual lines rather than only chord changes. So I tend to use more oblique and contrary motion in relation to the melody than similar motion. And I can manipulate block style chords, but I try to expand on that, particularly for when I'm writing a solo guitar arrangement. Starting with the melody and the bass line that already exist, and thinking of them in terms of 2-part counterpoint, and trying to use rules of good counterpoint and working with them, such as contrary motion. So many experts have suggested, such as guitarist Howard Alden, who was here last year, that when you first begin to learn a new song, you should start by just learning the bass note and the melody and play that on the guitar. And I think it's an equally valid idea when starting a new guitar arrangement, and usually that's what I do. He also mentioned using 2 and 3 string middle string voicings like this, sometimes called guide tones, or also an excellent idea. But with only 6 strings to work with, I don't want to neglect any of them. I'm not suggesting that you need to play all of them all the time, only that none of the 6 possible string texture possibilities are unnecessarily ignored. So for example, in the arrangement of Misty that I did, that you have in the back of your handout, and that I'm going to play for you in a while, I have 22 6-string voicings, as well as single line voicings, and every other combination possible. And I often build up to these bigger voicings by thickening the harmonic texture, whereby 2 notes build into a 5 or 6 note voicing. This is also referred to as wedge style counterpoint, an apt name because of the V shape that's visible on a sheet of music when you have contrary voices moving in, outer voices moving in contrary motion. In an article for Music Theory Online, a publication of the Society of Music Theory, Bo Alphonse of McGill University said that wedge-shaped linear motion in Schumann's music was the main voice leading technique throughout. He was referring to the finale of the F-sharp minor sonata, opus 11. And because the guitar has only 6 strings, and short ones at that, anything that we can do to maximize textural possibilities is a good thing. So harmonic thickening technique is particularly effective for what we guitarists have to work with. So example number 5 on page 9, from There'll Never Be Another You, the texture thickens from 2 to 4 notes first, and then from 2 to 5 notes, and you can notice the contrary motion between the outer voices and the wedge shape that's characteristic of this harmonic thickening. I'll play example number 5 for you now. Melodic motion between the inner voices is encouraged as well. Example 6 on page 10 shows inner voice movement in Black Orpheus. Notice the descending line from A down to D in the first 1.5 bars, and the melodic line descending from B down to F in measures 71 and 72. This single excerpt also contains each of the 4 features discussed today, so we're going to come back to that. This is example 6 on page 10. So the goal with all of these examples is try to help us come up with a more personal approach to playing the guitar or arranging for the guitar, rather than strictly following the existing harmony using chords that you can find in any popular guitar method book on the market. Think compositionally in terms of independent linear voice leading, counterpoint, pedal tones, contrasting ascending and descending chromatic motion to try to create for yourself a new way to harmonize the melody. Of course, you're going to start with the composer's harmony. That's got to be the starting point. But if you're able to think creatively in working with that, and in these compositional terms, you can come up with some ideas that you wouldn't ordinarily think of, and begin to actually write for the guitar instead of just play what you know. So I'm going to talk about number 3, chromatic motion and thinking outside the box. This was kind of inspired by Jim McNeely, my arranging teacher in my master's program. I asked him about one of his reharmonizations, which I found a somewhat arbitrary approach, because he took the existing bass line of a very popular standard song and he changed it to a chromatic one and then fit new chords over the revised bass notes with little to no apparent regard to the original harmony. So I asked him, isn't that somewhat arbitrary? And he said, well, maybe you can think of it that way, but he said sometimes you're sitting there trying to figure out what to do, and sometimes it's good to just think outside the box and try something to see what you can come up with, see what happens, and he found that stimulated his creative juices. So I decided to try that, and I think it worked because I'm using this technique in quite a few of the arrangements that you'll hear tonight. The next example, number 7, you can see how I superimposed a chromatic bass line on polka dots and moonbeams. I go up from F to F, 1 octave chromatically, and the melody is repeated 3 times. We're not going to listen to each 3, but each time it happens, I vary. There's a slight variation in the harmony. I'm going to play example 7 for you now. So when Gene Bertoncini told me about his new music book, the one that I showed you earlier, I bought it, and I include an excerpt, number 8, on page 11 for you from his arrangement of I Remember You, just to kind of further support the points that I'm talking about, particularly the chromatic bass motion and the wedge-shaped counterpoint. Notice his unorthodox motion moving from the lowest open E string on the guitar all the way up to B, an octave and a half higher, to harmonize the melody of I Remember You in G. It's pretty neat. It's a 2-part counterpoint at this point. This is just the beginning of the arrangement, but actually he's using the same chromaticism later in the arrangement with chords. In fact, you heard that sort of chromaticism in the example of Body and Soul that I played for you as well. It's quite unique, I think. And if talking about chromatic bass motion, if you go back to example number 6 on page 10 and check out measures 77 and 78, you'll see the chromatic bass line descending from E to B flat. And then a little later in measures 81 to 82, you see a chromatic bass line ascending from B flat to E. A lot of the chromatic bass motion I employ is simply a result of tritone substitution, whereby a 5th interval is replaced by half-step motion. On the guitar, it happens to be particularly easy to move a half-step on the 6th string rather than have to finger 2 strings, which is what I have to do if I'm going to resolve by a 5th interval. So I'd like to move on to constant structures on page 12. And 4th voicings. After I learned to harmonize a diatonic scale in thirds, I started working on 4ths like this, because mixing tertian and chordal harmony provides color, variety, and a modernistic touch. And 4ths are suited quite well for constant structures. Now, by constant structures, I'm referring to a guitar voicing that maintains the identical intervallic structure while being played. Combining functional and non-functional chords with constant structures was popularized in jazz by Herbie Hancock and Bill Evans, but the idea has been around for years, known as parallel harmony, harmonic planing, or parallel voice leading, used by a variety of famous composers like Debussy, Ravel, and Schoenberg. So when I am working on an arrangement, I see a melody moving in symmetrical steps like a whole tone or a diminished scale. I like to harmonize it with quartal, diminished, whole tone, or triadic derived constant structures, because constant structures moving in these symmetrical steps creates a very cohesive sound, yet their non-diatonic nature produces a sense of shifting tonality or kind of a sounding out. So you get the best of both worlds, in my opinion. So example 9, I use these in all of these ways, by the way. So I've got some examples and you'll hear all of them. And by the time I play Misty, you should be able to hear them for yourself. Example 9 on page 12 includes a reharmonization of the bridge of wave using quartal voicings. And this excerpt also contains pedal points, open string voicings, and some of the other features we talked about. Example 10 on page 13 is from There'll Never Be Another You. Dominant 13 flat 9 voicings derived from the diminished scale over an E pedal. And example 11, whole tone derived constant structures over the A7 chord. Example 12 on page 13 and continuing on page 14 is from Polka Dots and Moonbeams. This also exemplifies everything that we've talked about, but there are a lot of constant structures in this. In bars 22, in bars 23, the dominant sharp 9 chords, in bars 26, what I call mixed source constant structures, in bar 32. Let's have a quick listen to example number 12 on page 13. In example 13 on page 14, this is the last example, I use a quartal voicing that can be function as a major 6/9 or as an altered or natural tension dominant chord. I call this a multifunction constant structure because its function changes depending on what the bass note is, and because I can move it up and down the guitar like a block chord. In example 13, the C major 13, B flat major 13, and E 13 are all the exact same structure. And if you look at the previous example in measure 32 at the top of your page, the D flat 6/9 chord, B flat 6/9, and the A7 altered are all exactly the back and forth, and by altering the bass note, I've changed the structure. So now I'm going to play for you. We're running short on time. I said I was going to give a vocal discussion of some of where these feature points occur in MISTI, but I think by now you can hear them. And besides, I've indicated on the upper left corner for you what they are. So here's MISTI. Skip the improv. Thank you. I think I have time for one more. I'm not quite at 55 minutes yet. Can I play another one for you? Or Would you rather grill me? Skipping the improvisation. I'd love to answer any questions if there are any. Anything? I'm at your service.
I don't have anything myself.
I have like one question about maybe possible influences from piano players, because some of your techniques seem to resemble Harry Jones' approach to improvisation when he starts into the dominant that is far away from the main key, it kind of works its way back to the main key, harmonizing each note of the.
Well, I've always kind of, I don't know if jealous is the right word, but my relationship to guitar, I don't know if you can even call it a love-hate relationship or what, but, the guitar's limitations, I've always liked listening to piano players. I'm not sure if there's a direct influence or not, but I just admire the fact that you've got it all there in front of you and you can just do this and, you know, we can't do that.
I'm asking because some of your things kind of resemble piano player kind of approach to harmonization, which is very commendable.
Well, I hope so. I'm trying to, you know, move in that direction. I want to be able to play what you guys play. But, I mean, I guess and if I could, I don't know if you call it an influence, but if I could sound on guitar like McCoy Tyner sounds on piano, that would be great.
I have another question just related to that. We've talked about it a bit, but it impresses me that it seems very hard, and you're getting the flow going to it. I know we worked with that, but it seems like what you're doing is very hard. John can verify that. Doesn't look, I mean...
Well, it's especially
easy.
hard in this kind of situation. I mean, these are songs that need to be warmed up. I mean, when I was running through the Lecture-Recital at home, when I got to the end, I did just what I did today, but then I would play the arrangements again, and they were so much better. You know, I made mistakes, and I'm just thinking, please don't make any mistakes, you know, but it happens. I mean, they're hard enough that it's hard to just come out of the cold in Rochester and play them, but it's I don't know, I don't think it's any harder than what anyone else has to do. It's just a question of putting in the time. I mean, yeah.
Well, I think it's fantastic. This is a great presentation, and one of the great advantages you have is that you're so articulate and clear in your presentation. And anybody who's looked at any amount of guitar instructional videos knows how exceptional that is. I just have a couple comments and maybe sort of friendly sort of suggestions or amendments for like work for the future.
Right.
One of them is, I don't know the answer to this, so I'm really just asking. How does the way you're talking about arranging for the guitar relate to the way other people who are talking about this pedagogy? So if we go on Jamie Abersole and sort of search out, you know, guitar arranging, how does your approach compare to some of the other books that students might be likely to pick up on?
Well, the thing I've noticed is actually there's a list of some arrangements to Misty that I checked out in the back, and what I found is there tend the vast majority tend to be exceptional examples by guys like Tal Farlow and Joe Pass who just sit down and play, and they haven't worked out anything in advance. And I don't think, you know, like I met Joe Pass, for example, and he said, I never practice, I just play. And and he just, you know, it's a very extremely high level of play. But then the other example I found, the last example on the reference page, is where a composer actually wrote an arrangement for a guitarist, and the guitarist performed it, which is like the opposite end of the spectrum, which is, you know, kind of purely classical. And I feel I'm not quite there yet, but this is a start of kind of bridging the gap. And, you know, when Harold talks about the improvising composer and trying to bring to my attention, you know, it shouldn't sound hard. You know, whether it's hard or not, it should just be flowing. And I know I can get there with enough work, but ideally it's something that, just like when Joe Pass has been playing all these years, night in, night out, certain things become just automatic. So my idea is that if I'm working at the formally arranging these guitar pieces, if I do enough of these, you know, another 30 or arrangements like this, and I memorize them all, I'm hoping that that stuff is going to slowly creep into my improvisation. It's going to become part of my vocabulary, so it is going to flow in a more natural way. Now, to answer your question more directly, like, this is probably the best example that I could find of someone who's actually using these techniques, and I don't know that Gene's ever articulated them the same way. I mean, I've had numerous conversations with him, but it's hard to pin him down, you know, in that way. And there's nothing, and he didn't, you know, he had one of his students write this stuff out, and it's exceptional. But and then I heard Howard Alden's lecture, and I don't think there are too many people talking about it in the articulate way that you're speaking of. And I think that most guitar players learn the way I do. We just learn, you know, inversions, and we learn how to kind of riff off those inversions, and then, you know, and that's it. And the guitarists who are doing really special stuff aren't talking about it. People like Joe Cohn, people like, there's a guy in my hometown named Cal Collins, I don't know if you're familiar with him, and another guy named Kenny Poole, both unfortunately have passed away. But the way that those guys got started is they were listening to Count Basie records and Duke Ellington records, and they were trying to figure out, how can I play that on the guitar? And they came up with their own way. And if you talk to people like Herb Ellis, as I have, about Cal Collins, they don't know what the hell he's doing, because he came up with that stuff in his bedroom from listening to these Ellington and Basie records and trying to figure out, geez, how can I get those sounds on 6 strings? So he came up with something that was homegrown and something that's not in the book. And he never wrote about it. Now, I would like to write about it. It would involve a lot more detail and take a lot longer than what I had to work with this lecture recital, because I'm kind of starting from where I was 3 years ago. But in order to do it properly, you've got to go back and talk about chord scales, and talk about how to comp on the guitar using chord scales rather than these guitar method diagram chords that are in the book.
Yeah, well, I mentioned that just because you've got a great sort of pedagogical project. I imagine a lot of developing guitarists would appreciate the tips that you give, and sort of trying those out on standards and sort of seeing what will work and all that. If you go to get this published, the first thing the publisher is going to ask you is, how does it compare to what's already on the market? So it's probably good to be really aware of what other guys are trying to sell in terms of that, so that you can find a niche for yourself. The other 2 suggestions I would offer as sort of friendly amendments to what you're saying is that you talk about classical and Lovett and Targa, but I think probably your best friend in that realm is probably Villalobos, because of so much of what he does with open strings, with constant structures, like you're talking about, how in many cases those chromatic shifts are really sort of tritone substitution kinds of, and most classical guitar players who may hear you speak will immediately know what you're talking about if you talk about some of those preludes, the etudes, you know, it's all through that stuff. So again, he's solving a guitar problem in the same way that you're talking about.
Right.
The other suggestion I would make is, in the last 10 years, finger-picking guitarists, sort of in the wake of Tommy Emmanuel, have gotten much more sophisticated in terms of the way in which they work on arrangements. And so there's a whole kind of cottage industry of guys doing DMAs and DVDs and books about arranging for the guitar. Now, a lot of times that involves, you know, dad-gad tuning, various kinds of sort of tuning alterations that allow things to happen, you know, on the neck.
Right.
Maybe you're not so much interested in that. But in terms of placing your own work in the greater guitar community, it's probably good to be really aware of those things, so you can see how you fit vis-a-vis them, and particularly
Right.
who are coming from there to where you are.
Yeah, no, that's
How
a
to kind of
valid,
relate
yeah.
and connect with them.
No, I hear you. That's a great point, and yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I heard Tommy Emmanuel play just this morning on YouTube. I was listening to, he played, what was it? It's a popular song. I think it was Michelle, the Beatles, Michelle, Ma Belle, da 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 da. And he played the whole thing with harmonics, and it's not really fingerstyle because he had plectrums attached to all of his fingers. So as far as I'm concerned, that's not fingerstyle, because there's something in between the finger and the string. But nonetheless, it was absolutely incredible. It was almost exclusively harmonics. But you're absolutely right, and that's something I hope I'm going to have the time to do once if I'm successful in getting out of the prison, which is Eastman DMA program. You know, I find there's just so much stuff to check out and not enough time to do it. But I appreciate that a lot. I was really happy that I knew you'd come up with something really, super pertinent to being a guitar player as you are. And I'm looking forward to taking your online course. I was telling the other guys about it in May, is it, or?
Yeah, starting May 15th.
Yeah. Is there anything else? Thank you so much.